Were you ever that 1 in 1 million? If so, what's your story? I'm a 19-year-old male. In August of last year, I was driving with my sister when suddenly her face turned cold. "Gavin, your eyes are yellow," I remember her saying. I quickly pulled down the passenger's mirror, and to my horror, 2 yellow eyes radiated back at me. Fast forward, I spent a month being sick. The initial diagnosis was hepatitis A. Went back to the doctor, nothing was better, things were worse in fact. Was sent to the then to the liver transplant unit at UCSF. By this point my eyes had turned muddy orange, and my pee was the color of a mahogany tree. Anyways, the team of liver doctors at UCSF managed to save my liver. I was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis. Oh, and my eyes are white again. Not me, my wife. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida. She rarely gets sick, but has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she had a low fever and complained of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. That weekend she wanted to see the doctor. I told her she probably had the flu, just wasn't used the aches, and she always has trouble sleeping, but if she was still feeling bad Sunday we'd go to a clinic. Saturday night she couldn't sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. But on our way there, sure enough she's feeling better. Doctor checks her out, she's feeling fine now, no fever. He says she probably had meningitis but is recovering. I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, Monday, and ask him if he thinks it's fine I go. He says, yeah, no problem. That evening, wife is eating and laughing and all is good. Monday morning I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium. My wife didn't know where she was, so the neighbor drove her to the I book a flight home that night. The hospital checks her out. She has a fever, her blood cell count is in the basement, and she is completely out of it mentally. They are not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history, where we've been, etc. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and put on a cocktail of meds while they figure it out. Third day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite, maybe tick-borne. She'd been to the Midwest recently, colder caught it if she went walking in the woods or a park. Next day he comes in. Figured out the parasite. Why didn't you tell me she left the country? Huh, she hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria. I thought you couldn't get that in the US. You can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. What the hell? I retrieve her passport. CDC comes, does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps set up around the neighborhood. Mysterious vans start driving by spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week, but recovers just fine. If you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report you'll see a discussion of malaria and how the 20th number of cases all are related to people recently returned from endemic areas, except for one woman in Duval County, Florida who received it from a cryptic vector. Edit, TLDR, neighbor found my wife wandering in the street, took her to turns out she got malaria from a cryptic source. Found a CDC malaria surveillance report from that year, case 2. In November 2010, a woman aged 31 years sought treatment at a hospital emergency department for fever, severe headaches, nausea, vomiting, and malaise. She was admitted to the ICU for severe hyponatremia, thrombocytopenia, tachycardia, borderline splenomegaly, and epistaxis. Both the hospital and CDC confirmed a P. falciparum severe malaria infection with approximately 10% parasitemia. She was treated with oral quinine, clindamycin, and oral doxycycline, and recovered successfully. Probable routes of transmission were investigated. The patient stated that she had not traveled outside of the United States during the preceding 2 years and had no history of malaria. In 2008, she traveled to Nicaragua and stated that she had received malaria chemoprophylaxis at the time of her trip. She reported no history of blood transfusion or fourth drug use. Mosquito trappings conducted around her home in Florida revealed no plasmodium // infected mosquitoes and no additional malaria cases in close contacts or persons residing in the area near her home. The origin of the infection remains undetermined. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital, and they told us that I probably have a stomach flu and should go to the doctor next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40°C and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to her and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. We went to the and I stayed in the hospital for about 2 weeks, but they couldn't find anything. They treated me with broad-range antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better, and they told me to go home and recover. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home and that pirates were coming to steal our food. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on, and she looked at me like I had summoned a devil. She took my temperature and she instantly took me to the again. I had a 41°C fever. When we went back to the hospital, I got treated immediately for inflammation and they did a wide range of tests again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they couldn't find it. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having the hallucinations, but on all the scans they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later I would have died because of the pus flowing in my body. Apparently there is a 1% chance of all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans, or that the area was so inflamed they didn't see it. So after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed in the hospital for over 4 weeks just because of my appendix and my bad luck on being that 1%. For my 7th birthday we went to Disneyland. They just happened to be having a car a day giveaway when we were there. For my 7th birthday, Mickey Mouse gave me a Pontiac Firebird. I'm allergic to potatoes. Never met someone else who is, so I guess it's 1 in a million. Never eaten chips or fries. I was diagnosed with leukemia. I got a bacteria growth which killed the leukemia. A real 1 in 1 million chance edit. I almost died thanks to that bacteria though edit. THX for the silver and gold kind strangers. How I met my wife. I'm from the Netherlands. She is from the US. We met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel. Decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us. We hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 3 months. 2 days after I leave I lose my phone. Don't have any way to get back in touch with her. I had little money and could stay work with the people in the desert, but I kept thinking about her, so after a week I say I'm leaving. Take the next bus, goes 3 times a week at 5 AM, and then a train to Tel Aviv. I had no idea how to find her, where to stay, and very little money. I email a couple hostels to find a work stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance. I get an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv. I can come in for an interview because they have a spot. This is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping of my belongings, I went back to the first hostel to see if they would give me information. They wouldn't give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city of more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kind of defeated, I start wandering around exploring the city. After a couple hours I get hungry and decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well out of the tourist area and find a place that's almost empty and rather cheap. I sit down, order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food I see my now wife walking past the restaurant. She sees me, I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and just kind of grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking. I throw like 200 shekels, way too much, in the table, and sprint after her, explained, and the rest is history. When I was a kid, I was chilling in the water of the Mediterranean Sea in Turkey. Suddenly I felt an awful burning sensation on my stomach and my legs. I looked like I had been brutally sandpapered, and I got a 40 deg point C, 104 deg point F, fever. Turns out I made contact with a jellyfish, and later found out that it hadn't happened on that beach for 10 years or so. I was just extremely unlucky. No sure about the odds on this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was on an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrushable, on a tour of the desert in western China. When I was like 7, my father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane didn't survive, but somehow I got out with a concussion and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert, in the wreckage of the crash, 50 kilometers from the town of Port. On the edge of the desert. The people who found me were some tree planters. They plant greens in the desert to protect towns from sandstorm. A lot of people live in these desert towns in China do this. Found me on their way picking up a shipment, and the only reason they looked was BC they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand, and went off the road to test. Edit. First thing first, according to legends, 15 minutes. I never tested it though. So, according to my dads, the theory that I might have lived was because the plane was mostly made out of fabrics and wood. So when the plane crashed, the front half collapsed and took the majority of the impact. Though I got knocked out, I was probably covered under the wreckage and in the shades. It cooled me off enough to survive for a day or so. I was in 2 separate car crashes in 2 separate cars in less than 45 minutes apart. Also, go you shark boy. Edit. I wasn't the driver for either crash. First car was hit from the side. Friend came and picked us up. Car lost traction, and we slid off the road and hit a pole. Neither was that bad, just poor timing. The first one I don't know about the exact odds, but I was born on 7777 and weighed 7 pounds and 7 ounces. Sadly though I clocked in at 6:50 a.m. The other is that around the age of 14 I started to notice the outsides of both of my feet starting to get much wider. After a couple of years of buying expensive custom-made shoes they decided to perform surgery on my feet. Turned out I had extra muscle growth along with something else I don't recall at the moment. My podiatrist told me he submitted a scholarly article on it. May also have been genetic, as when my dad was 3, he developed an extra toe growing out of each one of his big toes. I've got the middle toes on both feet webbed, so did Stalin. Quack. I passed out from laughing too hard once. It was truly a 1 in a million thing. When I was a teenager I had just started working at the local Sears Auto Center Express Lube shop, and on day 1 did a quick orientation in my first oil change. The manager walked away when he felt I was good to go, and the oil change went well. Fast forward a few days later my manager asked me to come into his office and he explained that the oil filter I had used had one huge flaw. I didn't know what that was, and it turned out the filter was pressed on backwards into the filter can, and it wouldn't allow oil to flow in, and it damaged the motor. They had to purchase a new motor for the person, and I still kept my job. He said it was a 1 in a million chance that would have happened, and it did on my first oil change. Not sure if this is a blessing or a curse, but I'm an extremely tall human. 7 feet 3. Yes really. Not sure how rare that is. I have the rarest type of synesthesia, lexical gustatory. It means I taste words. I was struck by lightning while talking on a landline. This was in the early 90s. Lightning struck the telephone line and traveled through the handset to my ear. My parents drove me to the ER. I couldn't talk very well. My brain knew what I wanted to say, but my mouth didn't want to say it. I had a terrible stutter. My doctor told me that I had had a dose of good, old-fashioned electroshock therapy. My speech was normal the next day, but I get a terrible headache whenever a thunderstorm comes through. Edit. Autocucumber edit 2. Thank you for the gold. I have an unknown type of autosomal dominant intranuclear myopathy. My type of it is so rare that they haven't even seen it before. Getting diagnosed was a multi-year struggle. They pretty much had to rule out everything else. It doesn't feel great to be in this club by myself. Countless blood draws, MRIs, CAT scans and a Bayesian genetic test. So far, it looks like my father and I are the only ones with it. Yay. Edit. Thank you guys for all the kind messages and support. I really do appreciate it. If anyone is going through the struggle of getting a diagnosis, message me. I can't help with the diagnosis, but I can help with the feelings. Second edit. As a researcher has pointed out, this isn't really rare. Just a type that hasn't really been seen in the population yet, meaning there is certainly more people out there, just not tested or diagnosed yet. In the future, I'll probably be 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000. Sorry to make everyone think I was 1 in a million. I had AFM, acute flaccid myelitis, when I was really young. It's like weak polio, if that makes sense. My legs struggled to keep me up, and I was consistently collapsing. However, the disease wasn't discovered at the time, so I wasn't diagnosed. I was in and out of hospital several times a week, being tested for all sorts of bone cancers. When the disease was discovered, I matched every description of it perfectly. But now, I'm running cross country and doing alright. I'm allergic to the cold. Like literally. I get intense hives, swelling, I pass out, and throw up. Doesn't even have to be freezing. Below 45 degrees without a jacket and I can't do it. I have to carry an EpiPen with me in the event that I drink something too cold or have a severe reaction. Edit. Thank you kind stranger for my first silver.